The incident in Oklahoma, do you think that was orchestrated by the FBI or the Department of Justice?
And again, I've read a lot of reports on it. I've read especially with great interest General Benton Parton's report on it that had just come out in the John Birch Society's flagship magazine, The New American. I happen to believe that there's much more to that story than we're being told. And again, I would fault the media as much as the government authorities, because the media is taking the government line and simply publishing it. There is not, other than local media in Oklahoma City, there's not a lot of research being done as to what really happened there.
Another issue that a lot of people in the militias are concerned about is the Federal Reserve System and the money supply that we use that comes out of the various regional Federal Reserve banks. Now, you've done some research into that?
Absolutely.
And what kind of conclusions have you drawn that people should think about?
Well, I think what everybody should be considering is that as long as you have a situation where a private banking cartel can issue currency to a government that's interested in borrowing, they're going to continue to do that, and eventually that will destroy the currency. And you see, most people in government are not aware of that, in my opinion. Most of the people that I've spoken with at the congressional level and in the Senate, I don't think they understand really what they've gotten themselves into. And the Federal Reserve is certainly a system that creates money out of nothing, a private banking cartel, and with that kind of a relationship going on, it's only a matter of time before it's destructive of our economy.
Well, I think it already has been.
Well, and it continues to be.
I have continuously tried to get the attention of the local president of the Federal Reserve Bank here, Catherine Minahan. I've written to her. I've asked her who her shareholders were. I went to the law library to study the legislative history of the Fed, and I found out that individuals could buy stock in the bank, so I wrote to them, and I tried to buy stock in the Federal Reserve Bank. I didn't get a response. I wrote to them again. I asked for a list of their shareholders. I didn't get a response. And I wrote to her. I asked her to come either on my shortwave program or on this program. I didn't get a response. So I'm very disillusioned with our local Federal Reserve Bank. But the problem is that, as you point out, it is a privately owned corporation. It's continuously debased our currency, and it's not working in the best interests of our society. And I think it is unconstitutional, because the Constitution specifies that gold and silver should be legal species.
Right.
And these green and white pieces of paper aren't gold or silver. They're not even backed by gold or silver. So
it certainly occurs to me that if our founders had ever thought that the American people would be silly enough to accept an unbacked currency, you know, that we would get just what we deserved. And I think that's pretty much what's happening in our economy today. Our founders certainly wouldn't have been silly enough to think that a currency that isn't backed by anything of any intrinsic value is a good idea. And they had one problem after another with local and state banking institutions early on in our country issuing unbacked currency.
Now, do the militias offer any kind of solution to these various problems that we're faced, like our involvement in the UN or the Federal Reserve System? Are they going to do something, or does government have to move first before they react?
Well, right now, our basic modus operandi, our SOP, is distribute as much information that is credible and provable as we can. Much of what I do as an information service and linked with our friends in Northfield, Vermont at the Liberty News Service right now is focused on getting Charles E. Collins elected president. Charles Collins is the only candidate that has spoken clearly on what he would do about the Federal Reserve. He has a comprehensive plan to revamp the money system. He has worked in conjunction with another monetary expert whom I respect greatly. That's Byron Dale, who you may have heard of. And I think that along with that, Charles has also talked a great deal about removing the war and emergency powers. And I don't know if we have time to go into the basis of the war and emergency powers today.
There are a couple of minutes, yeah.
But basically in 1933, an emergency was declared by Franklin Delano Roosevelt that resulted in the confiscation of the gold and silver that was the currency of the country. It became illegal to trade in gold and silver, and it was at that point that the Federal Reserve was allowed to completely expand the currency more and more. In other words, they can issue currency at their will. And that is the problem that we're faced with. And I believe the Federal Reserve and the war and emergency powers are the two most serious issues and the most easily understood issues that we can confront as a militia in the information area. We are also involved in building an underground communications network, quote, underground communications network, We're involved in all the shortwave broadcasts. I'm sure, as you know, being a shortwave broadcaster, we have a lot of people that are championing our issues in that arena. Internet communication, and of course in a modern warfare situation, which is really what we're dealing with, an ideological battle, communications is the key to everything. Having a clear line of communications between people that are interested in seeing liberty restored here in our country.
Well, I think if you want to restore liberty, you've come to the right program. Community access, I don't know if you have community access up in New Hampshire, I'm sure you do, that you must be taking advantage of that quite a bit.
Well, unfortunately, I'm a satellite viewer on television.
Oh.
And you see, in our community is very rural, so we don't have public access. In the more concentrated areas of New Hampshire, they do have it, and there are people that are doing the kinds of shows that you're doing here, David.
Well, that's interesting. The movement I have spoken to other people in your movement who say that in other parts of the country the militia has gone underground. Is that true?
Well, I think that there are a lot of people. I think that the greatest majority of the people that are involved in militia activities are interested in being unobtrusive, quiet, preparing for an economic unraveling, and I think that they believe that the best service that they can do to the country will come from their identity, or their not being recognized as being a threat. And this is why people like myself, and I'm sure people like yourself, have come forward as spokesmen, because there are so many of those that either do not want to or are not able to articulate our views, and this certainly has been a problem, and that's why I've kind of been elected or been taking it upon myself to do what I do.
Well, I've never gone full steam ahead and say I'm a militiaman, although I do believe that people have the right to own guns, and people have the right to train with weapons and form groups to do that. Rod and pistol guns. And I had a guest here on this show from Egypt who was a former diplomat for the Libyan government. And we did a show on human rights in the Arab countries. And I asked him, well, what's the situation on gun control in countries like Iraq, Syria, Libya, Iran? Guess what?
I bet there's pretty...
One-party states,
right,
solid gun control.
Right.
So, I mean, that wasn't too surprising. So I think that the liberal forces in Congress that want to tighten restrictions on guns, either wittingly or unwittingly, would make it easier for an end of our democracy to take place. So that's why I think that the people have to be assertive on that. We're doing a show next week from Jews for the Preservation of Firearms Ownership, sending a representative here to Hull to discuss this topic more in depth. In your experiences as a militia leader, do you feel the media has given you personally a fair ride?
I personally have been treated well by the media, but it was only because I have a lot of friends that are involved in show business. I have one particular friend who was involved in the rock music industry, and I have studied and paid attention to what people suggested we didn't want to do that people in the West, other militia representatives, were doing. Recently, you'll notice that most militia people appear not in camos or fatigues. They're not, they're not wearing military garb. And it was our opinion that, first of all, it's only when we're involved in field exercises that we want to dress that way anyway. When we appear before cameras, we want to appear as professionals.
Well, when Norm Olson came to Congress, he was in fatigues.
Well, right, but see, and we believe, and I personally believe that that's threatening to the American public, and I think that what we need to do, we need to find a way to get to the heart and soul of the American public so that they understand how critical these times are for them. You see, if we scare them more than the government, if they're more afraid of us than they are of the government, then we're not serving ourselves well. We're not serving the cause of liberty well. We need the American public to understand that it is the government that is going to be the problem. We certainly have no hostility towards anyone in our local community. We've been very lucky. Even the liberals in our community seem to think that we're doing some good things.
Well, Newsweek